Hi, everybody. My name's Julie Smith. I'm your instructor for MEDC 1630, and I wanted to give you kind of an introduction of what I see as media literacy and what you can expect the rest of the course. Okay, you ready? All right, so why do we study media literacy? Well, let Buzz and Woody tell you. It's because media messages are everywhere. The average American spends over 11 hours a day with mass media. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. What I am saying that if we're going to spend that much time with something, don't you think we ought to analyze it and study it? Absolutely, we should. So what is media literacy exactly? There are a lot of different definitions of it. Almost too many official definitions of it, sadly. I can tell you what it's not, okay? It's not media bashing, and it's not educational technology. Sometimes you might hear teachers say, well, I teach media literacy. I have iPads in the classroom. I'm like, no. That's not what it is. You're analyzing and evaluating and participating in the construction of media. All of the different definitions of media literacy have these words, and these words all fall under the umbrella of critical thinking. And everybody says that critical thinking is more important now than ever, so media literacy has to be important also, right? I have a friend who refers to media literacy as a 21st century survival skill. We want critical consumers. Now, what that means is that we don't want people to hate the media or just bash the media all the time. I want to think of being media literate as kind of like being a food critic, okay? A food critic examines and critiques the way the food is prepared. What ingredients are used? What techniques are used to prepare the food? How is the food presented on the plate? Who's the chef? Who's working in the kitchen? What kind of restaurant is it? What's the atmosphere of the restaurant? How does the food taste? What's the texture like? Is there an aftertaste? What's the overall feel of the meal? This is what a food critic does, right? This is what a media literate person does also, except with media productions instead of food. So the challenge is, right, is to teach people that the media exists. And that's actually pretty hard because we're completely surrounded by it. I had a professor once tell me that it's like trying to teach a fish that the water exists. You don't teach, the only way to really teach a fish that the water exists is to pull it out of the water, right? So I used to do this assignment in my media literacy classes where I would say, okay, we are going to go 48 hours without any media whatsoever. And we're going to keep a log. And we're going to write about it. And we're going to journal about it. And we're going to go through this together. And I'm going to do it too. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. You know why? It was impossible. Not only could my students not do it, and they ended up lying on the assignment, I couldn't do it either. I'm not going to ask my students to do something I can't do, right? Now, a few years ago, it might have been easier, but now that we have these, it's next to impossible to go an hour without media. I'm a junkie. I'll be the first to admit I'm a media junkie. There's no way that I could go 24 hours without it. Yeah, it's bad. All right. So why bother? Average Americans consume 60 hours of electronic media a week. Now, these circles, I think, I'm not sure that I buy them completely. At least in my house, the internet circle and the video game circle would be bigger than the television circle. I'm kind of surprised that TV is still number one to such an extent. Most of the radio listening is secondary media activity, meaning that we're doing something else while we're listening to the radio. And what are we typically doing? Driving, yeah. The smartest thing the radio industry ever did was do a deal with General Motors and put radios in cars. So I think that the video game circle is going to get bigger, and the internet circle will get bigger, and the television circle will get smaller. That's my prediction anyway. Middle schoolers have 3 hours of screen time every day. Toddlers have TVs in their rooms. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying that this is bad, but here's what I am saying. The purpose of television is not to educate or inform. The purpose of television is to make money for the advertisers, okay? So here you have a tool in a toddler's bedroom that does not have their best interest at heart, right? Teaching them about work, the world, love, sex, friendship, education, consumerism, the environment. Should I keep going? Okay, so you have a stranger in a toddler's bedroom teaching them about the world when the toddler is not their main interest. That, I think, is worth taking a step back and really thinking about it. Most of my college students got their news from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. I don't know if that will still translate now that Jon Stewart is no longer on the show. What's interesting to me is that a lot of students now, at least people under 30, are more interested in getting news in a satire form, knowing that it's satire, than from a traditional form that claims to be objective when they really aren't, like MSNBC or Fox. Okay, so again, we're blurring the lines between education and entertainment. Is that problematic? Is it possible for people to receive information without being entertained? I say not anymore, because look at this. Teens say they're not interested in the news because it's not presented in an interesting way. That number, 10%, is only going to get higher. Because, like the writer Neil Postman said, we are the most entertained but least informed society on earth. We're much more interested in entertainment than we are information. Information can sometimes make us uneasy or nervous or sad. Entertainment just makes us entertained, right? So if you are a news producer, you know that you have to try to produce your news in an entertaining way to keep people watching, because your job is not to educate or inform, your job is to keep people watching. Okay, see how this works? There's loads of commercials in prime time. We all know this. What I think is going to be increasing exponentially because of TiVo, Netflix, and DVRs is the amount of product placement, not just in movies and television though, but if you look at Kim Kardashian's Instagram feed, that's nothing but product placement. She gets $15,000 every time she tweets about a certain product. So a lot of stuff is included as part of the story when it's really paid advertising. And since we don't watch regular TV anymore, right, we fast forward through the commercials or we binge on Netflix, that's the up and coming way for people to get their messages to us, is through product placement. So what does it all mean? What it means is that we got to figure out how to get people to be media literate, and that's where the challenge lies. You know, I speak at schools and I preach about media literacy a lot, and they're like, well, that's great, Julie, sounds great, but where are we going to put it? Yeah, that's the challenge. It's truly cross-curricular. It really does belong in every subject. And I use this image, you know, there's school at the top, and then I see media literacy as the bottom, because it really does cover it can belong in every possible subject matter. And that's a challenge. Okay, so here's my theory. We can't change the message, we can't change the sender, but we can educate the receiver. We can educate the receiver to make sure that whatever messages are coming through are being evaluated critically. Don't be a sheep. I essentially tell my students they need to have internal bullshit detectors on at all times, even when they're in class. All right, so how do we do this? We ask questions. We ask lots and lots of questions. Oh, I need to fix this. The question here says, who is the communicator? So if I told you that one of these magazine publishers donated $500,000 to the Democratic Party in 2008, which one would it be? Pretty easy to tell, wouldn't it? Yeah, of course, Us Weekly. I guarantee you put this on Facebook, somebody will share it and think that it's real. I'm not kidding. Because Abraham Lincoln is a credible source. And anything with Abraham Lincoln's picture on it, we are going to believe. I know. It's sad. So here's another example, and I'm sorry I keep moving my little thing around, but I want to make sure you see this. This is an example that was not actually used in the news, but I think it's such a great example that I want to share it. The center picture is the original photograph that was taken by Imperative Studio, okay? For example, Al Jazeera could crop the left side off and show an American with a gun to that man's head. Or CNN could use the right side of the photo and show the American giving the man water. You never know how the story is being framed or the picture is being cropped. And you need to just assume that every picture you see in the media has either been cropped or doctored or framed in some way, and we'll get more to that later. What's the format of the message? The format affects everything. And these are old examples, but it's so good. I still use it. For example, most of the news during this particular week in January 2012 was about the election, the total news, especially in the newspapers. The cruise ship that went aground in Italy only got a little tiny bit of newspaper coverage. You know why? Because that story was a visual story. So it was the #1 story in cable news because it's visual. Newspaper stories are word-based, television stories are picture-based. The #1 story in the news is not always going to be the #1 story on TV. The news on television is always going to choose the most compelling video, and this is compelling video. It's compelling. So of course it's going to be on the news. You want to ask, what's the story? What are they choosing to tell us? Typically, when the Pope comes to the United States, the story is going to be about the sex scandals because it's sex. What's the story here, CNN? Is this the most important thing that you can tell me about ISIS? They lure women with kittens and Nutella? This is news? I'm not making any of these up, by the way. These are all real. And CNN, you got 24 hours of news to fill. I get it. So you're going to tell me that this is breaking news? The Titanic sank 102 years ago? That's breaking news? I'm so old, I remember when breaking news made me nervous because I automatically assumed that something horrible had happened. Another question to ask is, who's the intended audience of the message? Okay, like right now, I'm using slides and Screencast-O-Matic and YouTube and Canvas and the internet to communicate with you, right? But if I was going to tell my 89-year-old dad about what I teach, I would probably sit and just use my voice because he's not techie. So you want to frame your message for the intended audience. This is exactly why there are no shows aimed at senior citizens. Let me explain. Television shows are produced to deliver audiences to certain advertisers. The most coveted audience for advertisers is the group that's 18 to 34 years old. Not only do they have discretionary income, but they're also still willing to try new products. Senior citizens might have money, but they're not willing to try new things anymore. I mean, think about it. Would your grandparents ever change coffee brands? No. No. So no advertiser is interested in senior citizens. They have already made their brand choices. They are interested in the 18 to 34 group because they don't have to spend their money on boring insurance and college tuition like my age, but they're also still worried about their hair and willing to try new hair products, for example. Okay? That's why most television shows are aimed 18 to 34 years old, because that's the audience that advertisers want. Television shows are produced to deliver audiences to the advertisers. So you always want to keep in mind, who's the intended audience of this message? So, for example, and this is old, but it's so classic, I love it. This was the Candies ad that appeared in 17 magazine. This is the one that appeared in Cosmo. So Candies is familiar enough with its market to know that 17 isn't going to want the butt crack or the condoms on the counter. Here's an ad for the military. It's very black and white, matter of fact, aimed at parents. Here's an ad for the military. There's Navy SEALs hidden in there somewhere. But that caters to someone's sense of adventure. This particular ad was in Rolling Stone. This one was in Time. The intended audience is completely different, but the subject and the product is the same. Okay? Another question you want to ask is, what's the content of the message? You might think this is a still from Jay-Z's music video. What I see is nothing but a 3-minute advertisement for the champagne brand that he bought. Okay? There's little hidden messages in everything. You might see the cover of a Newsweek magazine. I see a stereotype. We'll talk a lot about stereotypes. Look at the mixed messages coming here. This was at my grocery store a few months ago, so I had to take a picture. I'm being told that I need to make homemade cinnamon rolls. I'm also told that Kim Kardashian in that is somehow fat. I'm also told that I'm supposed to walk off 37 pounds by Memorial Day, but I need to make my ice cream from scratch. No wonder we're all crazy. Look at the mixed messages we get. So what techniques are used to give these messages? Camera angles are very specific. Would it surprise you if I told you that these pictures were taken by the same photographer? And I bet you can bet who he voted for in 2008 primaries. Also, later on, I'll show you the tricks of why the quarter pounder in the ads for McDonald's look a lot different than the quarter pounder that you actually get. A lot of the content of messages have more subtle, latent messages. And Silverblatt gets into that in chapter 2, the latent versus manifest message. The manifest message here is by Jim Beam. The latent message is, girls are a pain in the ass. Catch that? Check out the latent message here. This is a phenomenal ad. It caters to the fear that every bride has. The number one fear of a bride is not to be left at the altar. The number one fear of a bride is that that dress is not going to zip up because you got to order the dress 6 months in advance. This is the fear. So the latent message here is, you better be skinny for your wedding, honey. It's not just an ad for Slim Fast. It perpetuates cultural messages. We see 3,000 ads a day. Most of these, you know right off the top of your head. Right? We'll play with more of these later on. But we need to be aware of all this. In fact, we see so many ads and we're so familiar with brands that I've had students tell me that actually looking at these two images causes cognitive dissonance, meaning mental discomfort. It's wrong, isn't it? It's just wrong because we're so programmed. We need to have critical thinking, not just because of the ads we see, but because of all the fake crap that's floating around online that we don't use our filters for. And I'm sharing this example because it was given to me by a Webster student who was a senior as an example of a biased photo of Hillary. Harper's Bazaar should have never used this biased photo of Hillary. It hurt me. It hurt me physically that this girl thought this photo was real. A senior in college. Here's other things on Instagram that got shared a ton, people thinking it was real. A whale in Venice. Listen, there's no way the water in Venice is that clear. Also, this is actually a picture from Pearl Harbor, the Pearl Harbor movie poster starring Ben Affleck. Okay, so people share stuff on social media without thinking for a second that it might not be real. This made me crazy. Last year when all the problems were going on in Ferguson, this picture floated around social media quite a bit. Who on earth would think that this was legit? People do. I'm telling you, they need us to help them. Here's the original. Here, let me move. No mother should have to fear for her son's life every time he leaves home. That's the original. But the one on the right was the one that got shared all the time. Shame on them. So I'm going to end this first week lecture with a great quote from George Carlin. And that's the theme for the next 8 weeks. Question everything. Everything. Let me know. You know 1,000 different ways to get a hold of me. And if you have any questions, let me know. But good luck with your assignments and your discussions this week. I think you guys are going to do great. Okay. See ya.